How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and to the final episode of Mid-Season Evaluation. I can't believe we're already at the end. Time really does fly when you're on the grind. But anyway, in this installment, I'll be giving an honest review and opinion on how the NYXL and Vancouver Titans have performed through the first half of the 2019 Overwatch League season. You already know the drill by now. The NYXL have the worst record, so they're up first. Through 14 games, the NYXL are 12-2 with a plus 30 map differential, which is good enough for second place in the league. They're also currently frontrunners to win the Atlantic Division, meaning that they would automatically qualify for the end-of-year playoffs. Let's take a look at New York's road to regular season dominance. But before we talk about the games they played in, how about we discuss their offseason? After an extremely disappointing finish to 2018 where they choked against the Fusion in the second round of the overall playoffs, the NYXL had themselves a somewhat busy offseason. Move number one that happened was letting Janice walk in free agency. Him alongside the team's former coach Wizard Young both decided to sign with the Washington Justice. Next, New York signed two new and talented DPS players from their academy team in Flower and Nene. Both of them possess a ton of potential, so these moves made a lot of sense. We all knew how dangerous Flower could be based off of his World Cup performance in 2017, and Nene showed promise in contenders. The NYXL were absolutely stacked at DPS, so much to the point that I was actually very interested to see how that would work out in terms of a rotation in a DPS-oriented meta. It almost felt like they had too many players on this position at this point. These moves actually kind of felt necessary though, since Libero was the only DPS player on the team during Season 1 with legit flexibility. That's part of the reason why I feel like the NYXL fell short during the playoffs. The meta had changed, so Sabiobi and Pine couldn't just play Tracer, Widow, or McCree all the time. Their lack of flexibility definitely held them back. Whether you were a fan of these new player acquisitions or not, everybody had to admit that the NYXL were once again looking like one of the top contenders to win it all. The roster was stronger than ever. Game number one for the NYXL would be against the new-look Boston Uprising, and right away New York was rocking out with a lineup we had never seen before. There was no Sabiobi or Pine to be found. Instead, Nene would be the starting Zarya player, and he made his presence felt immediately. Him and Mono in particular really seemed to pop off as the NYXL started their year off on the right foot with a 2-1 victory. While this game was closer than most thought it would be, Boston has turned out to be a pretty good team so far, so it's not a big deal. Then just 2 days later, they kept the momentum moving forward by winning against the Washington Justice as well as their former teammate and coach. Their first week went fairly well, I'd say. They failed to completely stomp anybody, but they still look good nonetheless. Up next was one of their many Season 1 rivals, the LA Valiant. The Valiant were one of the few teams to actually beat the NYXL more than once. The last time these two faced off was in the Stage 4 finals, which is a series the Valiant would end up winning, by the way, so now the NYXL had to pay them back. And they did so in a hard-fought 3-2 victory. Now it was time for a showdown against the Outlaws, and the NYXL proved once again that they still have this team's number by winning this game easily. This wouldn't be the end of the NYXL roles though. In Week 3, they won 3 straight maps against the Defiant and appeared to have firm control over their Korean rivals from last year, aka the Seoul Dynasty. After a quick 6-0 start through 3 weeks, the NYXL were set to play the San Francisco Shock in their final game of Stage 1. If the NYXL won this game, then they would finally achieve their first ever undefeated stage in franchise history after being just 1 game off of this achievement 3 different times in the inaugural season. New York actually ended up winning this game 4-0, but don't let the score deceive you. This game was far closer than it indicates. Regardless of this factor, the NYXL achieved their first ever undefeated stage. At 7-0, they also clinched the Atlantic Division and more importantly a playoff berth. They would unfortunately just fall short of the number 1 seed in the Stage 1 playoffs due to Vancouver having the superior map differential, but New York was still sitting pretty as one of the favorites to win the title. Team number 1 now standing in their way of advancing in the playoff bracket was the Dynasty. Seoul snuck into the playoffs at 4-3, but I have to admit that they were playing pretty well down the final stretch of Stage 1. It was hard to imagine the NYXL struggling much to get the win here though. After all, they just beat them pretty easily a few weeks ago, and New York were 5-0 all-time against them if you include Season 1. They were the superior team on paper, and had a good track record against their opponents. It seemed like the NYXL had this one in the bag. Fate unfortunately likes to play cruel jokes on us sometimes though. The NYXL were not the ones to come out on top in the end. Instead, they actually found themselves getting pushed to the brink by halftime. They were able to win Volskaya, but Seoul seemed to finish them off pretty well on Rialto. New York was at the mercy of Michelle Sombra. It seemed like there was nothing they could do to stop it. Getting eliminated in the first round the way they did is kind of embarrassing. The Dynasty were without a doubt the better team throughout the entire set. I have to give credit where it's due to Seoul and their coaching staff for drawing up such a beautiful game plan, but I have to scold the NYXL here. There should be no reason that you lose this game, and losing the way you did only gives your haters more evidence that you choke in big games. After a sudden and very disappointing end to their playoff run, the NYXL had some improving to do in order to make sure something like this never happened again. I do have some praise for these guys though. I was really impressed with how their lineup was performing in the GOATS meta. Mono was a top 3 main tank, Animo was dying the least out of any player in the entire league, Jonek was still doing Jonek things, and then there's Nene. He made a case as one of the best Zarya players in the league. As Stage 2 got underway, the NYXL made the decision to trade Arc to the Washington Justice. Arc is an absolutely insane player, but the problem was that the team preferred having Animo in the lineup. I'm sure the Justice were willing to pay a good amount of money for Arc too. The guy definitely deserved better than to just rot away on the bench. I'm glad the NYXL were able to send him to a team where he could actually be of use. After making no other changes, the NYXL were set to prove they were not the chokers everybody labeled them as. Their path to glory would start with an opportunity for vengeance against the Fusion. For those of you who still may be relatively new to the Overwatch League, the Philadelphia Fusion pulled off a huge upset over the NYXL in the overall playoffs during the inaugural season. It's also worth noting that the NYXL were the #1 seed in the whole tournament. The NYXL dominated all year long during 2018. They only lost 6 of their 40 games and went to every single stage final, so them losing to a Fusion team that barely squeaked into the playoffs as the lowest seed in the entire tournament was seen as a massive choke. Now the NYXL finally had a chance to pay them back. And let me say that they made sure not to hold back any punches as they crushed the Fusion in their revenge match. This win really seemed to give the team a big energy boost. They would go on to dominate the Dragons, Justice, and Mayhem after this win. And to add insult to injury, they even beat the Fusion again during Week 3. Now sitting at 5-0, the NYXL were more than likely going to another stage playoff. Another perfect 7-0 stage where they win the Atlantic Division was also looking very realistic. All that was left now was 2 matches against a struggling Atlanta Reign team. At the time, the Reign were an absolute mess. Dufresne was gone and Dako was sitting on the bench. Atlanta was a very ugly 1-3, so the NYXL looked like they had another undefeated stage secured. Strangely enough though, this would not end up being the case at all. The Reign didn't just give the NYXL a challenge, they beat them. Atlanta pulled off a wild upset. Their Week 3 match actually wasn't even close. Atlanta won the first 3 maps of the set. I'm still not 100% sure why, but Atlanta seemed to read the NYXL like a book. The game plan they used was genius. The Reign did a great job of pressuring Mono and forcing Jonek to make mistakes that he usually doesn't commit. But this win was surely just a fluke, right? New York had over a week to learn from their mistakes. They surely wouldn't lose to the Reign again. The NYXL rarely made the same mistakes 2 games in a row. But guess what? The Reign basically proved that they're this team's kryptonite by once again beating them. This time things were a lot closer, but that doesn't change the fact that the NYXL lost to a middle-of-the-pack team 2 times in a row. How do you let something like this happen? Because of their shortcomings, they failed to win the Atlantic Division. 5-2 was still more than good enough to clinch a playoff berth, but they found themselves in the bottom half of the seeding. Now came the real test though. Could the NYXL actually win a playoff game? I admittedly was a little bit worried about them. I thought they would beat the Gladiators in round 1, but I thought for sure they would struggle. I was concerned that they lost their confidence after losing to the Reign, but thankfully they proved me wrong by getting an easy 3-0 win. Now it was time for the NYXL to prove they were not pushovers. Their next game would be against the undefeated Vancouver Titans. This was their opportunity to prove to the world that they should still be taken seriously. It's too bad that the Titans are the superior GOATS team by a decent margin. The NYXL will go on to lose 4-1 in a somewhat close game. I feel like Mono had himself a really good day, but it just wasn't enough. This game left me with mixed feelings. On one hand, the Titans were clearly the better team. They had been practicing GOATS for a very long time, so they were simply more skilled on the composition, but at the same time, the NYXL are supposed to be one of the best teams in the league as well, so I was expecting them to make things at least a little bit closer. So far, I would say that New York has done well. They've underperformed here and there, but they're still playing around the level that I expected them to coming into the year. But I will admit that I am a little bit disappointed in them. Losing to the Dynasty in Stage 1 was a bad look. The point of Season 2 was to prove that you're no longer chokers, but instead, you only added more fuel to the fire. Their playoff shortcomings will only lead to more suffering. It's gotten to the point where people just aren't taking this team very seriously. Now whenever this team makes a playoff appearance, everybody's probably like, hey, the NYXL made the playoffs again. I wonder who they're going to lose to this time. Because of their Stage 1 fail, and losing twice in a row to Atlanta, I've decided to give the NYXL an A- as their midseason grade. I felt that it was necessary to take some points off of their final grade due to the things I just mentioned a second ago. But still, at the end of the day, New York is in second place. Only the Titans possess a better record. At the rate they're going right now, the NYXL will likely make the overall playoffs and get one of the top 2 seeds. Hopefully this team plays even better in the second half of the year. Don't let me down, guys. Now let us transition into the second team of the video, which is of course the Vancouver Titans. And let me start by saying, congrats! Through one half of play, you are first place in the Overwatch League because of your 14-0 record and plus 40 map differential. Coming into year 2 of the Overwatch League, the Contenders Korea team known as Runaway announced that they would be signing with the Vancouver Titans organization after their incredible come-from-behind victory against Kangdu Panthera to win Contenders. They also beat the 2018 South Korean World Cup team in an exhibition match. Needless to say, this mass signing immediately made Vancouver a threat to the rest of the league. I personally thought that the Titans would be good, but I wasn't quite sure how good. I thought that maybe the Titans would be top 5 or something, but little did I know that Vancouver would actually have a serious leg up over most of the league. They had been practicing in the GOATS meta far before a majority of Overwatch League teams did. I thought that lack of league experience and arriving in the US just days before their first match would make them have a little bit of a slow start to Stage 1, but these guys instantly proved me wrong in that regard by sweeping the Dragons in their first game of the year. I was a little skeptical when the Titans just barely came out on top against the Charge in the following week, though I will admit that Guangzhou were looking pretty good at the time, but if the Titans wanted me to regard them as a top tier team, they would have to win more convincingly. After winning a hard-fought game against the Shock 3-1, the Titans started to go on a tear. The Valiant and the Eternal were their next two games on the schedule, and neither of them stood a chance as Vancouver won both of those matches without even breaking a sweat. At this point, it had become painfully obvious that the Titans were far better than most of their competition. The rookie players were showing everybody up. Everyone in the starting lineup was doing something that really stood out. Bumper's Reinhardt was unpredictable and hard to play against. Janu was practically immortal with the second lowest death rate in the league on Diva. Summons had the second highest average damage output. Haxel's Brigida stats were off the charts. Then both Twilight and Slime were being put in the running as the best Lucio and Zenyatta support line in the league. But as good as the Titans had been playing as of late, they did not seem ready for the wacky style of the Chengdu Hunters. It honestly felt strange knowing that the Hunters of all teams almost took down Vancouver. For the first time all stage, Bumper actually appeared to be getting outplayed. Among was suddenly a Reinhardt god instead of just a Wrecking Ball one trick. I don't think the Titans knew that the Hunters were capable of playing GOATs so well. Sure, the Titans would prevail 3-2 in the end, but the damage had been done. They almost took the L to an inferior GOATs team who was middle of the pack at best. Now Vancouver would once again face off against the Charge. Some people thought that maybe we would see another close game like last time, but the Titans were having none of that. They were quick to prove that their close match against the Charge was merely a fluke by destroying them 4-0. In their first stage of being an Overwatch League team, the Vancouver Titans finished 7-0, won the Pacific Division, and earned the 1 seed in the playoff bracket. What a way to kick off your existence. At this point, I was very impressed with what I saw. It was hard to imagine them not at least making the grand finals of Stage 1 at this point, and that's exactly what they were able to do. The Uprising and Dynasty stood no chance as the Titans swept both of them with ease. Now came the real challenge though. The Shock took a map off of them in a tightly contested series during week 2 after all, so maybe the San Francisco Shock could give Vancouver a run for their money. It is worth noting that this Shock team was much improved, and they too cruised through their first 2 rounds of the playoffs. The hunch about this maybe being a close game ended up being correct as the Titans were once again pushed to their limits. At one point, the Shock even took a 3-2 lead in the series. The Titans were not about to let things end here though. During their runaway days, they had lost in the finals of Apex multiple times. Bumper and Haxel joined Runaway when the team was first created, so there was no way they were going to go through another tough loss. It happened far too many times already. Their leadership and resilience helped Vancouver bounce back and win the Stage 1 finals 4-3. You gotta give it up for the Titans. This team has been through a lot, and they used their past experience in big game scenarios to help them come out on top. After making no changes during the 1-week break, the Titans seemed rejuvenated after winning Stage 1. This team further proved that they're one of the best by dominating even more. There were no close matches to be found in Stage 2. They started by crushing the Spark in week 1. Then the Titans kept the momentum moving forward in week 2 by defeating the Outlaws and Dynasty without too much resistance. Then they started winning by even more during week 3 by getting a 4-0 victory over the Fuel and Uprising. At this point, it kind of felt like the Shock were the only team that could give Vancouver a challenge. After getting the week off due to the Dallas homestand, the Titans finished Stage 2 strong by winning against the Defiant and Dynasty convincingly. But this time they would not get the top seed in the playoffs. Instead, the Shock would be the ones to get it since they had the better map differential. And with them being in the same division, Vancouver would end up dropping down to the 3 seed. Did their positioning in the playoff bracket really matter all that much? Well, no, not really. The Fuel once again stood no chance as they won that game in the quarterfinals against them, and then they won a somewhat closer game against the NYXL as I mentioned earlier in the video. Now it was time for an epic rematch. The Titans wanted to continue the reign of terror, while the Shock were determined to get some payback. While this game was very close, it was obvious that the Shock wanted it more as the Titans fell to them 4-2. I'm sure that this team was really hurting because of this, since they had gone through this pain so many times in the past. But anyway, no matter what you think of this team, I think it's important to respect them for being so good. They have come a long way to get here, and have made the most of it so far. Because of how successful this team has been, I've decided to give them an A+ as their midseason grade. Through 2 stages, they have a stage title and a stage runner-up under their belt. I think it's also worth praising how this team has only lost 1 game so far. It took 14 regular season games and 6 playoff matches for somebody to finally take them down. If you count contenders, the Titans were on a winning streak that lasted almost an entire year. Then of course, as I mentioned before, they have a top player at every single position. Bumper, Zalmansu, Janu, Haxel, Slime, and Twilight are all arguably top 2 or 3 on their respective roles. This team has been ridiculously successful. I feel like giving them anything lower than an A+ wouldn't be giving them the justice they so rightfully deserve. So long as Ghost remains meta, this team is not going anywhere. With that being said, that is going to wrap up the final episode of Mid-Season Evaluation. What did you guys think of my reviews for each of these teams? Make sure to let me know down in the comments section, and feel free to give your own grades for them while you're at it. If you enjoyed today's content, then be sure to like and subscribe. Wait, don't move your mouse, don't click any buttons yet. There's one more thing I quickly wanted to say. I wanted to thank all of you for the tremendous amount of support you've shown this series. You guys really seem to enjoy it. Reading the nice comments where people talked about how much they were looking forward to every episode brought a smile to my face every single time. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for your continued support. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's video. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.